definitely creating content that helps people is really the solution.
What really works is building a community, consistently doing events like webinars, and producing content specifically for certain categories.
You earn that raise and you earn that job.
Welcome to Future Fuzz, the digital marketing podcast.
Eoin, thanks for joining today. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Justin. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Right, so let's dive straight in. Please tell us all about Atomic and your role there. I'm sure the listeners will be keen to hear.
Yeah, so I'm CMO at Atomic, which is a Dublin-based B2B insights and marketing agency. I spent all my life in the tech marketing arena, I suppose, working with lots of big brands and some tiny ones that you wouldn't know and I probably can't even remember. But Atomic works with lots of B2B businesses and helps them basically understand their buyers better. So we're really an insights and research fueled agency, and our focus is really trying to help people understand B2B buyers better than they otherwise would. And things like motivations, attitudes, psychology, those kind of things that can make us a bit more scientific with the way that we go to market and the way that we address buyers in our target market.
And we spoke before, Eoin. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to bridge the gaps for a lot of companies that struggle with this area of marketing, right? And maybe you can explain like which sort of companies you work with, because it's a pretty extensive list.
Yeah, so Atomic works mostly with SaaS companies. And so B2B SaaS companies, quite often they're trying to break into Europe because they've been, founded in the US and they're trying to kind of dominate the world. But that whole idea of B2C versus B2B comes up a lot because in B2C, a lot is known about the psychology of the buyer, their behaviors and their attitudes. And that's not really so true in B2B. So we work in generalities about buyers in B2B a lot. So if we do have any information about the buyers themselves, it's usually dusty old personas that are kind of veneer thin. And they get stuck in things like demographics and pain points, but they don't really go beneath the surface to understand the psychology of the buyer, their behaviors, and how they think and how they behave, So those things are really important, and B2C does a lot more work in that arena than we do in B2B. So Atomic's really about trying to get under the skin of those buyers and being able to address them in a much more human way.
And why do you think that is? Why do you think that a lot of companies focus far too much on B2C buyer understanding as opposed to looking into B2B? Because the buyer journeys and the process is far more complicated, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I think because it is complicated, it's a bit of a daunting task to understand B2B buyers. And we always talk about the fact that behind a B2B buyer, there's always a human. I am a B2B buyer in my work capacity, right? I'm also a B2C buyer when I go out and buy my groceries and my antiperspirant and my fragrances and stuff. So we both have that duality in our lives. And I think it's challenging for businesses to understand their buyers because it requires us to kind of step out of our normal day-to-day lives and kind of empathize with people in their business roles and how some of those more personal traits can impact their role in their business or their job.
So let's dive into one example. Can you give us an example of a tech company that have come in and then really they didn't know enough about their buyers, but they really dived into it and now they have a better understanding? Have you got like an end-to-end example of that?
Yeah, I won't mention the client name just because I don't want to slag them off for not knowing anything.
Sure, you're safe, yeah.
But if we take the CIO, for example, which is like a lot of tech companies want to sell to the CIO, right? And,
right.
That's the peak of the hierarchy, so the most senior decision maker in the IT function.
And very, very difficult to get hold of, right?
Very difficult to get hold of. And if you were able to get in front of one, you'd need to be able to say the right thing, right? So you need to be able to understand what to say and how to address them and how to speak to them about what matters to them. And so CIOs, for example, are typically system thinkers versus marketers like us who are typically linear thinkers. So we think in like journeys and funnels and things from beginning to end.
Yeah.
They think about things differently in terms of interconnectedness and interdependencies. So they think about things as a system rather than a linear journey. And knowing something like that, as profound and simple as the fact that they're system thinkers, we're linear thinkers, that has an impact on the way that we communicate, the kinds of content that we might make, and the kind of help that they look for from a vendor or from a tech company when they're going about trying to make a purchase decision. So it's really interesting when you start to dig under the surface and think about, again, the humanity and the psychology of that person. What way do they think, and how might it be different to the way that we would think? So that CIO versus marketer example is a good one, I think, because it's really simple, and it kind of points to the fact that people are individual and different based on all sorts of different complex reasons and rationales.
I can imagine that CIO will probably be a lot more risk averse, wouldn't they?
Well, typically, but actually it's really interesting. We've done a big study on CIOs, so again, I'm kind of living and breathing the detail of that. But CIOs quite often have to play a very difficult role on the board of their business because they are the technical advisors, but they also have to manage people's massively inflated expectations around technology.
Yeah.
So the CMO might come in and say, well, we need to revolutionize our content management system, or we need a new CRM system, or we need X, Y, Z. And there's a lot of excitement and hype that comes from that because that CMO is probably being marketed to by lots of software companies that sell them stuff and making big promises. Whereas the CIO then has to be the kind of the adult in the room, I suppose, and bring all that back down to ground and be rational and practical about the complexity and the time scales and the difficulty of making those things happen. So it's not easy being a CIO, I think. You want to be able to be pragmatic, but nobody wants to be the no guy or the guy who always has to say no to everyone's excited expectations, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And in that, let's say that journey and process, how many other people do you think would be involved? In that buyer's process, because we're seeing more and more and more decision makers actually get involved now. How many do you think might be involved in a complex IT purchase?
In a complex IT purchase, maybe up to 10 or 12.
Right.
It really depends on what's being bought, I suppose, and the kind of people that are involved. I used that example of a CMS system. That might include the marketing function, but if you were buying something, a piece of technology that was supposed to be touching end users, that's really different than in terms of if you're buying a financial modeling software or some kind of ERP, or it depends on what parts of the business it touches and also what other parts of the technology stack it interrelates with. So your CRM, for example, has to work with all of your marketing technology stack and has to work with some of your other customer experience stack and maybe your unified comms solutions. And there's loads of things that are not maybe obvious at the surface level, but once you start digging, you're like, oh, that has to talk to that and that has to work with that. And is that compatible with that thing that we've already got or we've already spent loads of money on? So there's lots of complexity there. And the bigger the seal, the bigger the pile of complexity that comes with it.
Right. Yeah, indeed. Now you work with lots of US tech companies that come into Europe and looking to expand into Europe.
Yeah.
Now, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see when they try to adapt into a local market?
Well, I suppose the fact is that Europe isn't one market, and I'm not suggesting that American people think that Europe is one country, but they certainly have a tendency to underestimate the diversity and complexity of Europe as a set of countries. American people say, like, do Europe, or let's do Europe. And they come here on their holidays and they're in Milan for a day and they're in Paris for a day and they're in Rome for a day and then they go home and they've done Europe,
Yeah.
There's a lot of complexity in Europe for sure. And I think even beyond language and culture, which are the obvious things, each of those countries has very specific political, market and industry nuances that can't be ignored when you're trying to market to the buyers in those regions. I've just done some research on this actually, and a lot of European marketers in US companies have very limited autonomy and control. Some of them are just kind of at the end of the conveyor belt, taking what's given to them and trying to make the best out of it. So the US team creates a campaign that's global and says every country needs to roll this out with probably guidance to say as minimal adaptations as possible because we want to be consistent. We want to be able to say the same thing.
Right.
But that drive for minimal modifications has an impact. So our research made a really interesting connection between autonomy and growth. And those marketers with control over localization beyond language have a 4 times better kind of resonance with local buyers. So if you as a European marketer have the ability to customize and personalize and inject some insight and relevance into your local marketing, and those guys report 4 times better connection with those local buyers that they're trying to address.
It's not just looking at the language, it's about going deeper and being more local, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Like localization in terms of language is only the very bare bones of it.
Yeah.
Least you can do is communicate with somebody in the language that they speak. But going beyond that to understand the competitive pressures in that country and the industrial relevance of macro trends, things that are happening in the political landscape. France and the Nordic countries are extremely different.
Right.
In Germany are extremely different, even though they're right next to each other, both from a language perspective, from a culture perspective. Even some of the kind of cliches and tropes that we know about those countries tell us that they're very, very different, and the people in those countries would be very different and would want to be communicated with in a very different way. So when US firms kind of say, let's do a European campaign, and all they give the European marketing team is, a budget to do language localization, that doesn't really scratch the surface,
Yeah, doesn't scratch the surface, I can imagine. And is there a hierarchy of when these tech companies look to go into Europe? Do they say we're going to go after UK and Ireland first, or they say we're going to really focus on Germany? Is there any particular, pecking order is maybe not the right term, but a priority? Because it's like normally the big 5, right? That's what they say, going after the big 5.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's different reasons for different things, right? So I suppose some US companies, if they've previously done all of their marketing in English, then you would go for those countries that are predisposed to English language. So obviously UK, Ireland, but some of the Nordic countries, there's a high propensity of English speakers in business in Germany, for example. Whereas if you go to France, for example, they tend to be a little bit less open to English language communications. Some of the countries like Italy and Spain, you might find that there's less of an English-speaking population in business and in businesses generally. So if you were trying to make it easy for yourself and thinking, how could we take our English marketing and apply it into Europe in the low-cost, low-impact way, then you'd go for those countries. But depending on what it is you're selling, there might be some countries that have, again, a different competitive makeup. Germany is a big focus for a lot of tech companies to begin with, and because it's a big market with a kind of booming technology sector. So that's interesting from an opportunity perspective, but you probably would want to then double down and try and make yourself a campaign that was very relevant to those German buyers, rather than trying to just take what comes from the US and translate it into German and get on with it.
Right. Yeah, indeed. I mean, they are incredibly different, aren't they? And I think, if you look at Belgium being so close to the Netherlands, you think, oh, quite similar markets, but, not at all, because the Dutch are more Nordic than they are European in many, many ways.
It's a bit of a borderline, isn't it? Because they kind of tend to be more like the North, and then you've got the influence from the South, so they're kind of in the middle, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. They've got the French and the Flemish, and then the Dutch definitely are more like the Danes than the Swedish than anyone else. Not many people understand that. Yeah, I can't speak for France, but I used to work in Germany a lot, and they're great to do business with. But when it's a no, it's a no, and when it's a yes, it's like yes, let's go. Decision making is very, very black and white. Yeah.
Future Fuzz is sponsored by SalesSource, B2B pipeline management and sales growth for your business.
What channels are clients asking for now? What content are they saying that they want to do?
So this research that we did, the guys that responded to the research for us and that we spoke to, they talked a lot about customized content. So again, they said so that it doesn't feel like a Google Translate job. That's the kind of parody in their heads, that we don't want to go to market with content that looks like we just plugged it into a tool to make it locally relevant. And they also talked a lot about local case studies. So again, if you're trying to go to market in Germany and all you have is references from companies in Chicago and in San Francisco, that there's a bit of a difficulty to relate to that because it's America, and America is very different. So they really prioritized local case studies and also local and like tailored local events. So again, not just rinse and repeat, take the event format from the US and repeat it in Europe. Try and tailor a local event to maybe something that's happening in the industry there, or the trend, or the kind of macro situation in that country, and make it locally relevant rather than just trying to apply one size fits all.
And what about video? Do they request that even more?
Video's a funny one because in terms of originating video, yes, but there's a little bit of a barrier in the minds of these marketeers that video is difficult to localize because subtitles are not always the best way to do that. It can be difficult. Re-recording it with local natural language speaking talent is costly. So there's a perceived barrier to that. There's obviously lots of technological ways that you can get around those things, but there's still a kind of residual resistance to localizing video because it's deemed to be difficult and costly.
Right. Okay. So there's a barrier there, and they need to learn how it can be easier, but it's challenging to convince them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then on to the evolution of ABM. So ABM's become a massive buzzword in B2B marketing. I've had some great chats recently about like the MQL being dead, and it's about the AQL, right? It's the account qualified lead, and it's looking at the account as a whole. But you've noticed that the definition of ABM has really expanded. So in your opinion, what does true ABM look like?
Well, yeah, this is a really interesting one. Like you say, ABM is so popular. It's all that anybody talks about, really. But over the last 10 years, I think a lot has changed. And ABM has become such a trend, I think, that things that would never have been called ABM before are now being badged ABM to kind of make them feel better or more relevant. So take like an industry campaign. So we're going to sell into manufacturing. That sounds boring as hell. But if you call it a one-to-few ABM program and you talk about a cluster of organizations in our ICP in manufacturing, it suddenly sounds like it's more contemporary, more relevant, more sexy. It's not an industry marketing campaign. It's a ABM thing, and that's relevant. We're doing the right thing for today's marketing world, But I suppose the challenge there is that the ABM that got all the tongues wagging originally was one-to-one ABM, right? So it was proven that doing that kind of ABM delivered way better ROI than any other type of marketing in B2B. But ABM on that kind of scale, one-to-one, requires a lot of time and money and focus.
Right.
And you're kind of putting all your eggs in one basket, right? If you say, I'm going to spend a concerted amount of time, money, and resource going after this one organization in the hope that they will buy from us.
Right.
You're putting all your eggs in one basket. So it takes a lot of courage of conviction, I suppose. And your account selection has to be spot on, or of course you risk wasting all of that time and effort because that account might not convert, it might not be suitable, there might not be a need there. So you need to have your intent and your data kind of lined up to make sure that you're making the right choices. But the principles of ABM are great. And I suppose going beyond debating what is and what isn't ABM, and if you're using data and insight to get better at targeting and using real insights and understanding to get better at the messaging and the relevance, then your marketing is going to be fundamentally different, right? If you can be more specific, more relevant to a smaller, more specific audience with good targeting and good personalization, that looks like really good marketing to me, whether we badge it as ABM or not. The trap, I suppose, is when people get a bit starry-eyed about ABM and then kind of half-ass it with poor data and poor insights. So that means you're kind of back to the spraying and praying mode, but you're doing it with like a jet and not a sprinkler. So spraying everywhere, you're spraying in a more specific direction, but you're still spraying any old crap that isn't relevant, that isn't based on data, isn't based on understanding or relevance. So you're still doing kind of crappy marketing, just in a smaller and more concerted direction.
How many accounts should they be going after though? What, one at a time, one company at a time, or selecting 10 or 20?
Most businesses wouldn't do one-to-one ABM just for one at a time.
Right.
They would be doing one-to-one ABM, so a concerted effort to sell to one organization, but they might be doing that to 5 or 10 at a time.
Yeah.
And again, it depends on what you're trying to sell, right? So if you need to spend 50 grand on a 9-month campaign to one organization, then you need to do the maths about whether that level of investment in selling to that one company is going to be paid back if that company does buy from you. So if you're selling something that's in the multiple millions of pounds worth of contract value, that's viable. But if you're selling a kind of subscription that's yearly and it's only £100,000, you wouldn't necessarily want to spend 50 grand trying to sell to somebody who's only going to spend 100 grand with you. So it has to be viable.
Yeah.
The one-to-one approach needs to be kind of weighed up in terms of the payback and the return on investment. But for those big enterprise technology deals where we are talking about millions of pounds, then it is worth investing a concerted effort in going after one business, and you can be so customized and so tailored when you do that, and you can become a real partner to the organization and really help them get to the end that they want to get to, rather than thinking about success as having sold something. You then reframe success as having partnered with that organization to fix their problem or solve their issue, you know?
Yeah, great. And I guess it takes a lot of time as well. I spoke to one ABM company that said that they are only doing ABM projects that are planned out for 2 years. I mean, would that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, again, it depends on what it is you're selling and the kind of sales cycle behind that. But, you know, there's always talk in the market at the minute about this kind of 95-5 rule. So only 5% of your target audience is going to be in market to buy anything at the moment. Again, depending on what kind of data or intent you have about the accounts you're targeting, if that account or that business is not ready to buy now, you're going to have to stay with them long enough for them to get to the point that they are going to buy.
Yeah.
And then you get into, you know, in the SaaS world, that's all about renewals and contract opportunities. So if they've just signed up for a 3-year contract that one of your competitors, you know that there won't be an opportunity to sell to them again for a certain period of time, but you might want to start speaking to them a year in advance of their renewal coming up, so that you've created that relationship. There's already a value exchange. They understand what they could get from you that they're not getting from their current provider, all that sort of stuff. So you might want to time your marketing efforts around what you know about their current incumbent and the opportunity to switch.
Brilliant. Yeah, everything is about timing, right? Timing is everything in comedy and ABM and you name it. It's all about timing. Timing is everything. Yeah.
I didn't think you were going to draw a parallel between comedy and ABM, but yes.
Yeah. Maybe there should be a sprinkling of more comedy in these messaging. We're definitely seeing that more and more on LinkedIn, right?
I think so. Yeah. Well, I mean, everybody's a fan of creativity, and you know, creativity and standout can come from being funny and injecting a bit of humor into a brand and giving it a bit of personality. I think is something that we're seeing a lot more of in B2B. You know, trying to make sure that brands are not stuffy or corporate or boring. People want to work with brands or partner with companies that speak to them on a more personal level, you know, and you can do that with comedy. Although, I suppose because comedy is so subjective, there's always a chance that you're going to get it wrong and it might backfire.
People buy from people at the end of the day. As long as you try and get it right and you're not too controversial, you should be okay. Yeah. So what's the future hold for Atomic? Where are you guys heading? What exciting projects have you got coming up? Any tools you're adopting? Tell us about that.
Yeah, we're doing some really exciting stuff, actually. We're building our own AI tools, as a lot of organizations are. So back in a view to building that insight profile and getting to that understanding of buyers, a big proportion of that is done through desk research and existing information that exists from analysts and academics and researchers. So we wanted to find a way to be able to access that information in a much more fast and low touch from a resource perspective way. So we're building an AI tool that doesn't scrape the whole internet, because the internet's full of crap. And we want to give it like a trusted list of places to go for really good insights and good information about certain buyers, and be able to use that as our own kind of ChatGPT interface to be able to extract the right insights from trusted sources and places where we respect the opinions and insights of, rather than just asking the internet for the kind of lowest common denominator answer.
Yeah, there's definitely some hallucination going on at times with ChatGPT as well.
Absolutely. And I suppose if you don't have a kind of base level knowledge about the thing that you're researching, you can't really validate whether what it's telling you is true or not. So there's a difficulty there that sometimes you don't know whether it's right or wrong, but because the AI tool says it, you just have to kind of go with the flow. So there's a risk there.
Yeah, definitely. It's there definitely are some risks, but that sounds fantastic. Okay, great, Eoin. So where can people find out more information about Atomic?
Yeah, so you guys can access our website at atomic.ie, and that's IE because we are based in Ireland. But we're releasing some really good research into this whole SaaS companies from the US coming to Europe. And we've got some really interesting insights around the CIO and soon to be coming around the CPO, the Chief People Officer. So we're creating lots of really good content that really helps marketers understand their audiences better. That's the whole goal. That's our mission. And that's what we believe in. So we're going to be continuing to roll out some good content. So come on board and check it out.
Brilliant. Eoin, thank you so much for being a great guest on the show. It's been a pleasure.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in and making the choice to listen to this podcast. If you liked what you've heard today, please don't forget to subscribe.